Thank you for joining us. You're watching a career success video from Computer Coach. Computer Coach is a Tampa-based computer training center specializing in helping IT and business professionals add on the skills they need to reach their desired career goals. If you are job searching, in transition, or are looking for guidance, please feel free to reach out to us at www.computercoach.com. Now, let's get started.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to Computer Coach's Friday Career Success Guest Speaker Presentations. Thank you for joining us. So if we have not met, I'm Suzanne Ricci. I have the pleasure of being the Chief Success Officer at Computer Coach Technology Training Centers, where we provide IT and business certification training to help individuals within their career, whether that's job searching or if they are already employed, upskill to get the skills that they need to land the opportunities that they want. One of the great things that I get to do in my job is host these amazing guest speakers every Friday that come and give us so much information that they are experts in. And today it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Jeff Baird. Jeff is a certified body language coach, and he's passionate about the science of influence. It's super cool. Throughout his career, he noticed that those that seem to have the most influence are also the ones that are likable. And that puzzled him. So he started studying the art and science of being liked and how building connections he can be successful in any interpersonal interaction. So with that, Jeff, I am going to turn over the presentation to you.
So thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. Let me get my screen shared here and we'll get rolling. And I sent out my LinkedIn, so got that going. All right, let's get into it. Thanks for having me. And Suzanne did a good intro, just a little bit more background about me. I've been in IT for about 20 years, and most of that time spent in data, especially prepping data so that we can get good information to decision makers to make decisions. And then I've got kind of this other weird parallel path where I'm a speaker and trainer on things like body language or the big five spectrum of personalities. And so it's kind of a strange combination of the two and really reflects my own personal journey. In the data world, we obviously care very much about making informed decisions. And I tended to be very left-brained and logical. And if I want to try to persuade or influence somebody, I tend to try to use lots of facts and logic. But as you might have observed as I did, that doesn't work quite as well as I'd like it to, especially if someone has a really strong opinion. Then trying to throw a bunch of facts and data at them almost has a tendency to dig them in deeper into their beliefs. We were talking before this about people's opinions on masks, and I won't get into my opinion, but you can see how both sides feel they're using facts and yet they're not successful in persuading each other. So I wanted to understand that better. And in the data world, they're starting to catch on to this idea. A few years back, I went to a data analytics conference and I saw this slide. They pointed out that if a decision maker is given data, but their gut feel says something different, then 90% of the time, let me hide my camera so you can see all the slides. 90% of the time, they're going with their gut. And as a data person, this drove me a little nuts. In fact, it's funny because I'll show the slide to other data professionals and many times they'll resist it, not realizing the irony that I presented them with data, but their gut feel said something different. Okay? So this doesn't mean that we want to not make informed decisions. And in the context of looking for a job, our qualifications and our fit and match for the position, that does matter. What we want to try to understand, though, is what's going into that gut feel. If we are a good match for a position and we have all the necessary requirements and qualifications, it's unfortunate if the decision maker's gut feel says otherwise, because in that scenario, they're probably going to go with their gut, which is also interesting in an industry where they're trying very hard to eliminate bias from the hiring process. But bias is, in my opinion, inherently part of who we are as human beings. And in fact, when they've tried to document how many types of biases humans have, there's like 174 types of biases. And these are shortcuts that our brains have developed in order for us to be able to make quicker decisions. So I started realizing this, that yeah, I want to have good data. I want to have information. And with my own career, I wanted to, yes, have the good qualifications and be a good fit for the job, but I also wanted to understand the gut feel part, the emotional side, what's going into that part of our decision-making process. And what I found is that body language is one of those areas that you can get a lot of bang for your buck. With some small changes, we can greatly influence how people perceive us and the work that we do. So I want to do an experiment, and I've been doing this experiment for probably 5-6 years now. What I'd like you to do is go to menti.com and put in this code. And in a moment, I'm going to go to the next slide, and I'm going to show you a picture of an individual. And without giving it too much thought, I want you to just type in a word or two, the first word or feeling that pops into your head. Okay, don't overthink it, just first impression, word or thought that comes in. And then we're going to look at a word cloud of everybody's responses and talk about it a little bit. So go ahead and go to menti.com, put that code in. All right, here is the individual. What words pop into your head when you see this? And let's switch over to Menti now here, and we'll see what we're getting. Comfortable, 20, okay. Lying, now that's an interesting one, huh? Let's see what other responses we get. Serious, okay, and it looks like we've got about 19 participants. See if we get a few more coming in here in just a bit. Obviously, so this is kind of sentiment analysis. The bigger the word, the more often that word comes up. And obviously, the bigger the sample size is going to get you better insights into what people are feeling when they see him. So it's always interesting to see what the different groups come up with. Serious is one that I see a lot in different groups. So some background about him is he is a founder of a job recruiting company. And he's changed it now, but he used to have this picture on his website so that when people would go to his website and see this picture, then these are the kinds of sentiments that people were feeling. So serious is getting bigger. Looks like we're getting more people saying that. Now, as I said, I've been doing this for about 5 years. And sometimes the word clouds end up being kind of funny. So we got like this one where scared and scary were the biggest ones, but you got things like wants to kill me, suspicious, holding something back, untrustworthy is a big one. And across the various groups that I do, the scary, scared are often ones that come up. And so there's some interesting things when I go through this exercise with people. One is how it's interesting how quickly our brains are making these snap decisions about this person. In those first moments that we're seeing him, our brains are making some decisions about his trustworthiness, about his competence. And when we really don't know anything about him, it's just the picture and just the nonverbals that we're seeing. The other piece that's interesting to me is that it's very consistent across the different groups I've presented with. I've done this for people around the world, and no matter what part of the world they're in, as long as they speak English, then their word clouds tend to look very similar. And so that suggests something about our nonverbals, that while there are cultural emblems and cultural differences with their body language, much of it is also innate as to who we are as human beings. And then the third thing that I think is interesting about this is it also matches what research suggests about nonverbal communication. So for example, if we look at what he's doing with his eyes, he's showing lots of whites in his eyes, right? What do we do when we're scared or if we're in fight or flight? Oftentimes our eyes will get bigger. And so that cue, along with a cluster of other nonverbal cues in this picture, can communicate to our brains that maybe he's in fight or flight. And that's why we get things like scared and scary. So having the research match this little experiment is useful because that means it's something we can change. We can adjust what we're doing with our nonverbals and affect these word clouds. As we're meeting people and interacting with people, they in real time, subconsciously are building these word clouds in their own mind and assessing you. So no pressure, right? There's a fine line between self-awareness and self-consciousness. But at the end of this, we'll have some specific things that we can do that can help us be perceived as likable and as competent, which will then result in getting more job offers. Now, the first application that you can start thinking about with this is LinkedIn. So Suzanne mentioned LinkedIn is hugely important and hugely useful. This is often the first impression that people are going to have of us. If a recruiter gets a resume that they like, or a hiring manager, oftentimes the first thing they're going to do is going to go to LinkedIn to look at it. And so we're going to come back and visit this here in just a little bit too, to talk about some things we can do with our profile pictures. But already we can see how that could be a big deal, right? If we have word clouds like this when people are seeing our LinkedIn profile pictures, that's probably worth spending some time on. All right, I want to drive home this point even further. So we're going to go back to Menti, and we're going to do another experiment. And this one is from National Geographic's Brain Games, if you've watched that. And this episode of Brain Games is based on a study from Alexander Todorov of Princeton. And what he did with people was he'd show them pairs of political candidates running for local office. And with no other information in the picture, he wanted to see if they could guess who won the election. So we're going to do the same thing here today. I'm going to show you 3 pairs of candidates. And in Menti, you can say who you think won the election. The same code as before. So here is the first pair of candidates. From this pair, who do you think won the election? Number 1 or number 2? All right, let's see what we're getting. We've got 7 for candidate number 2, 1 for candidate number 1. All right, there's another one for candidate 1 and 2. Okay. All right, I'll give you the spoiler here. In this race, candidate number 2 won the election. So most of us got it correct. Awesome. All right, let's try the next one. I'm going to advance this slide. Here is the second pair. Who do you think won this election? Number 1 or number 2? All right, number 1's getting a lot of votes for this one, right? And that is correct. Number 1 won this election. All right, let's try the last one. This one's probably a bit easier. So who do you think won between this pair? Number 1 or number 2? All right, we got 8 candidate number 2. Anyone want to help the underdog? All right, so you're absolutely right. Number 2 won this election. So how are we able to do that so accurately? We don't know anything about these people. We don't know their qualifications. We don't know their party. We don't know their guiding principles of good government. All we have is a picture, but we were able to mostly correct who won the election. And this is what Professor Todorov found in his study too, that people could guess correctly about 70% of the time. Now, as a data person, that bothers me quite a bit, that we're not making a more informed decision on people that are leading. But it shows how powerful and impactful our nonverbals are in influencing our decisions. And so as a data person, I tried to make myself feel a little bit better about this by saying, okay, if it's a local election and we don't have any additional information, then okay, my brain's making a shortcut decision. But surely this wouldn't happen on a national election, right? On a national scale, we have a lot more than just a picture. We have voting records. We have speeches and advertisements. We have tweets, right? We're getting bombarded with information. And so I was hoping that this wouldn't still be a thing on a national level. Well, Todorov came up with an algorithm of electability based on the different nonverbal cues that are communicating to us whether or not they'd be a good candidate to vote for. And as he's compiling this, what he observed is that there was 2 traits in particular that led us to wanting to vote for the person. If the candidate looked trustworthy and competent, then they're more likely to get elected. Now, as a side observation, I found it's the same thing with us when we're trying to get a job, or if we're trying to pitch an idea, or if we're trying to maximize our influence. If we have that balance of likability and trust, while still coming across as confident and competent, that puts us in the sweet spot where we have more opportunities. So he tried to take all the different nonverbal things that contribute to trust and competence and put them in this algorithm. And then not this last presidential cycle, but the one before that, he took all the major presidential candidates from both parties and put them through the algorithm to see who was most electable. And here's what his algorithm decided. Donald Trump, somewhat counterintuitively, is the most electable, and then Hillary is number 2. So that blew my mind. I thought that with all the other information, the nonverbals wouldn't be that big of a factor. And it'd be interesting to look across many elections because there are so many variables, but this one is at least highly correlated with the different nonverbal cues that communicate trust and competence. For application for us, our goal can be to try to find that balance between warmth, likability, and trust, and coming across as confident and competent. If those are out of balance, if we're in the lower right quadrant, for example, somebody that's very powerful and confident, but they're cold or they're aloof, or maybe they're kind of a jerk, these individuals can get their way if they have positions of power. But then it's really almost through compulsion and intimidation. They're using their position of power to get their way rather than inspiring and leading people. But if you're in the opposite end of the spectrum, if you're in the upper left-hand quadrant, you're very warm and likable, but nobody sees you as competent. This is the category of the bless their hearts. There's somebody that you might want to go hang out with on the weekend, but you wouldn't hire them because you don't see that they don't feel like they're going to do a good job. And then the lower left quadrant, nobody likes you and they don't think you can do a good job. And so we obviously want to avoid that quadrant. The good news is there are some tweaks we can change with our body language to boost the perceptions of warmth and likability and trust and still come across as confident and competent. So those are some of the tips we're going to talk about today. And we're going to talk about it in 3 stages of the interviewing process. I want to focus at first before the interview even starts and talk about some things that we can do to boost our chances of being seen in the correct light at the beginning of the process. And then we'll talk about the first impressions, and then we'll talk about some tips that you can do during the interview. And obviously now we're in a different world with interviews. It's much more virtual. And there's some signs that things are improving, and maybe we'll be able to get back to some in-person, but virtual is going to be around for the foreseeable future, and it's going to play a bigger role. And so we'll talk about these principles and kind of see where we can also apply them in a virtual world. And that way, whether we're in person or on a computer screen, we'll still be able to get the benefits. So let's talk about before the interview. We already see how important a picture is. It gets you elected. So our LinkedIn picture could be that very first impression that people see of us, and that first gut feel that might influence whether or not they're going to schedule you for an interview. Fortunately, there's a tool out there called photofeeler.com that can give us some insights and some data into what people are thinking about our pictures. You can go here and you can upload your picture, and they have different categories. They have a social, a dating, and a business category. So obviously in this context, we're looking at the business one. And you put your picture up there, and then people will vote on how you're perceived. Now, it's interesting too to look at what metrics they're using for the business category. They're measuring your picture on perceptions of competency and likability and influence. So we again see that balance of competence and likability. They must have done some research too to find out that that's really what matters. And so you'll put your picture up there. They'll rate you on those 2 things. And then the influence one, I think they put in there just because of the rule of thirds. But my expectation is that as competence and likability goes up, influence is naturally going to go up. So I put my picture up there a few years back, and granted, it's kind of an uncomfortable thing, right? To put your picture out there, get a little vulnerable and let people vote on it. I actually put 2 or 3 pictures out there, and then the one that got the best ratings across competence, likability, and influence is the one I went with. So this is why you see this one on so many of my profile pictures, because it got good ratings on PhotoFeeler. And it has 80 votes here. Obviously, the more votes you get, then you get a better sample size and a better idea. And to show how much this can change, I had an intern a few years back that put up 2 different pictures. So this is the exact same person, but different pictures. And quite a bit of difference in the competency, likable, and influence ratings between the 2. And some of it might have been a little counterintuitive. He's got a tie in the one that didn't fare as well. That's something I would have thought would have boosted competence. But this gave him some useful information to say, okay, of these 2 pictures, I probably want to go with the one that people are perceiving me as competent and likable. Now, what's also cool about this company is that they then take this data and do some analysis to try to help us decide what the perfect profile picture is. So we won't go through this entire thing. You can go to their blog. They have a blog post. I think it's called The Perfect Profile Picture, something like that. But I'll point out a few things on here from their findings. So these little bar graphs on here are the change from baseline depending on what they're doing in the picture. So this first one, if you have a profile picture where you're not smiling, you're just being serious, then you can see the negative impact that it has across competence, likability, and influence, which is interesting when you think about it. I might have thought years ago that LinkedIn's a professional setting, so I should be professional. And maybe that means not smiling too much and just have a stoic or even neutral expression. And it's even intuitive that might not make you as likable, but we see this interesting halo effect that even though the likability ratings were drugged down by not having a smile, competence comes down too, which is interesting. Okay, well, let's go ahead and smile. Smile with your mouth closed. All right, that flips the likability. Didn't seem to do much for competence. Smiling with your teeth visible. Wow, that really boosts your likability rating. And now competence is starting you're starting to be perceived as more competent too by showing your teeth. Interesting, isn't it? But then if you laugh, if you're a little too jovial, all right, competence goes back down, which shows there's kind of this sweet spot of what we want to do. And I'm going to explain further on a slide here in a few minutes on why this is. Our brains can tell the difference between what's kind of a forced smile that we're doing to try to do it because we know we should smile, like a family portrait, versus one that's a genuine smile when we're actually feeling emotion. And what they stumbled on here in their data is that phenomenon, our brain interpreting the different kinds of smiles. So here's some things that can boost the likability and competence. Some other tips that they have from their blog and from my own research. Professional dress was huge on being perceived as competent. Okay. You don't have to do super formal like tuxedos or things like that, but you want to have good professional dress in your LinkedIn profile, and that helps a lot with competence. The genuine smile, as we saw from that, is going to boost both. Avoid negative expressions. Common one that I see is the one-sided smile. It can be seen as a smirk or an expression of contempt or superiority. So avoid those kinds of negative expressions. Obviously, you want to have confident posture. And then they also found there was a sweet spot for how far away to be in the picture. You didn't want to be zoomed in too close, and you didn't want to be too far away. Kind of the sweet spot is what you see framed on my Zoom here, where it's your torso. That's kind of the sweet spot where they got the best ratings. So that's hack number one, or tip number one for today, is to go to photofeeler.com and upload a couple pictures in there and get some feedback on what you can do to improve your picture. And then when recruiters, hiring managers are looking at your LinkedIn profile, they're starting off on the right foot and the right first impression. Now let's talk about when you get to meet them in person or virtually in person. First impressions are, we can tell by now how important they are. So when they first see us, we want to try to maximize that opportunity and find the balance again of likability and competence. A question for you, and I can't see the chats as good when I'm presenting, but feel free to kind of talk amongst yourselves. But what words come to mind when you see an image like this one? What kind of feelings does this image invoke? Usually it's things like victory or confidence, power. And the reason for those kinds of feelings and sentiments with this is because when a natural byproduct of us as human beings feeling confident and victorious is to do expansive power body language. We take up more space with our arms and with our legs. We'll have our shoulders back. We'll have our head high. That's what we do naturally when we're feeling confident and when we're winning and when we're victorious. A few years ago with the Winter Olympics, it was interesting to see that type of body language was the same regardless of what country you came from too. That matches other research that I've seen that body language is universal, that regardless of where you come from, everybody shows victory and confidence the same way through expansive power body language. Even athletes that are born blind, in this study, they were looking at athletes that have been blind their entire life. And so they weren't able to see what the right thing was to do when you're victorious. And yet they do the same thing. Oftentimes hands above their heads, expansive body language. And so if this is what natural confidence and victory looks like, and we want to convey confidence, whether we're in a Zoom call or in person, then we want to be expansive. Does that mean you want to do this with your hands when you go into a job interview? Probably not, but you can find a balance between low power, which would be hunching your shoulders forward, your head down, and shrinking and taking up as little space as possible. Find that balance where you still have your shoulders back and your head high and a reasonable amount of taking up of space. This could be a little tough in an interview because we're nervous. And it's okay to be nervous. We all are when we go into a job interview. And I sometimes will notice myself feeling myself wanting to shrink as I'm a little fight or flight and a little nervous. And so I can remind myself to stay loose, to keep my shoulders back and my head high. Now, if you were the hiring manager, I'm going to show you a couple pictures of the same guy. If this was your first impression of him when you came to meet him, how do you feel about his confidence level and his competence? Is he coming across as confident? And again, you can just kind of talk amongst yourselves in the chat, but what are some of the body language cues he's doing that are showing a lack of confidence? You know, in this picture, he's rolled forward a little bit. He's got his head down. He's got a phone in his hand, which obviously there's all sorts of things we could talk about with the phone itself. But he's certainly not conveying confidence, like he's ready to rock. How about this one? Does he seem confident? He's got his arms folded across his chest, his head's still down. So this one usually people don't feel very confident and competent with either. How about this one? He's leaning forward again. He's touching his face. You know, when we are nervous and we're trying to calm ourselves down to make ourselves feel better, we'll often engage in some self-soothing behavior or calming gestures. So rubbing our hands, touching our face or our neck, playing with a tie or a necklace. These things are gestures that can help us to calm and self-soothe. So if he's sitting here like this, touching his face, oftentimes that communicates that he's trying to self-soothe and that he isn't as confident. How about this one? Okay, maybe this one's better, right? He's more open. He's more casual. Maybe too casual. That's something that we could consider, especially if he expands too much. Then he starts manspreading. So again, we see there's a balancing act here that we want to play, that there's confident and then there's overconfident, taking up too much space. Now, before we were in a virtual world, this is typically how we'd go through our job interviews. We'd have to go sit nervously in the waiting room while they came to get us. And so one of the ideas that I was playing with is, who says you have to sit down at all? What if you were standing up? And standing up is an easy way to feel more confident and powerful. When the person comes out to get you for the interview, you're not lower than them. When you're sitting down and they're standing up, they aren't towering over you, which can have an effect on perceptions as well. And bonus points if you're able to have a conversation with the person at the front desk. That's showing that you have good rapport and good social skills. In a virtual world, it has pros and cons that we'll see as we go through this. We don't have to worry about what's going to happen if they're coming out to get us in the waiting room, but we do want to be cognizant of what happens when we first pop up on the Zoom call and try to have things arranged so that we can be in a good, confident posture and be ready to roll. So that'll help with the confidence and competence. And now let's look at the warmth and likability side of it. There's a former FBI agent named Jack Schaefer. He wrote a book called The Like Switch. And his premise is that he found that in his job, if he could get people to like and trust him, then that's what enabled him to be able to do his job and to do it well. And so he was given some tough tasks like trying to get information from a spy or trying to get a foreign diplomat to turn against their country and come work for the United States. And his premise is he just tried to build a relationship of trust and likability with them. And now he uses that to get free flights and sell his book and things like that. And so his premise is if you can get people to like you, that opens doors. If likewise, if we can get people to like us in that first impression, that's going to give us a better chance of getting a job offer. In fact, when people first meet us, they're going to put us into one of 4 different categories. Their brains are as they're making an assessment about us. They're going to see us as a friend, or they'll see us as a foe, like competition or an enemy. Though they see us as a potential mate, probably not what we're going for in a job interview, right? And then the 4th category is completely forgettable, which you don't want in an interview either. You don't want to come into the interview, put all that effort and time, and then as soon as you're gone, they don't remember you. So if we can get in that friend category, that's what positions us best for getting offers. And he says there's a cluster of 3 cues that you can do when you first meet somebody that's going to send a message to their brain that you're a friend. The very first part of this cluster is an eyebrow flash. So if you can see on the camera, it's just kind of shooting your eyebrows up your forehead. This is kind of a nonverbal, what's up? Okay. You don't want to bounce your eyebrows up and down because that's a different message. In fact, I had my son a couple of years ago said, Dad, a girl smiled at me and was flashing her eyebrows at me. Is that a body language thing? I was like, yes, son, that's a body language thing. So you don't want to do too much, but a single eyebrow flash sends a message that you're a friend. You can try this in your virtual meetings. It's probably easier in person as you're interacting with someone. Give them a quick eyebrow flash and see if they eyebrow flash back involuntarily. And if they do, that's a good sign. It means you have some rapport and that there's some likability there. So that's the first part of this cluster of cues. The second one is a slight head tilt. You don't want to overdo it with the head tilt where it looks like you slept wrong all night, but a slight head tilt is a great nonverbal way of showing that you're listening to the person. You're also exposing a vulnerable area of your neck, and so that's showing trust in them, and so they in turn are going to trust and like you more. Here's an example from a conference that I went to. At the end of the presentation, she opened it up for questions and then threw in the head tilt to kind of show that she's listening. And then the third part of this cluster is a smile. But remember what we saw with photofeeler.com? It's not just any smile, right? There's a real smile and a fake smile. If you were to cover up her mouth, or if she were wearing a mask, could you tell that she was smiling, that she was actually happy? You can't tell from just the eyes, and the eyes are really the secret to being able to tell if somebody is smiling for real or not. A real smile generated from the genuine emotion of happiness engages muscles around the eye, and you get the little crinkles around the eyes. And our brains can tell the difference, as we saw in the PhotoFeeler results and in other studies that have been done. When we see a picture of a real smile, we tend to get a mood boost. We feel a little bit better. We don't get a mood boost when it's a fake smile. And this is going to be even more important with us wearing masks. Okay? If you are smiling at someone, they're going to have a harder time seeing it if your mouth's covered. But with a real smile, or at least smiling high, get those cheeks high and get the crinkles around your eyes, they'll still feel it and be able to tell that you're giving them a friendship cue and a smile, even with the mask. So those are the 3 clusters. I'm going to add a 4th, especially because there's an accommodation we have to make in a virtual world for it. Eye contact is obviously a great way to show confidence. When we make eye contact with people, we're conveying confidence. It's also a good way to build rapport. If you've seen those videos where they'll put 2 strangers staring into each other's eyes, and at first it's a little awkward, but then eventually their walls break down and they connect. Okay? That's because when we make eye contact, there's a hormone called oxytocin that bonds us and helps us gives us the warm fuzzies, and that helps us to trust each other more. And so eye contact obviously is a great way of doing this. In a virtual world, though, it's different. If I'm talking to someone in a meeting or an interview and I'm looking at their eyes from their perspective, where are my eyes looking? They're looking down because I'm actually looking at the screen down below, right? But on the other hand, if I just look at the camera the whole time, now I'm not looking at them. I can't see the nonverbal feedback that they're giving me on how things are going. The good news is you don't have to make it 100% eye contact. In fact, if you recall from in-person interactions, if it's 100% eye contact, it gets a little too much. Okay? And so a good rule of thumb for in-person is about 60% eye contact so that you can show confidence and connect with them without boring into their soul. And so in the virtual world, we can do the same kind of a thing. We can look at them to see the nonverbal cues they're sending, but don't forget to give some attention to the camera so that it feels like you're actually making eye contact with them. And so there's some things that I'll do to try to help remind me to give attention to the camera. One thing I'll often do is to remove my own video from the screen. In normal conversations, we don't see ourselves talking, and so that can be really strange for us and it can be distracting. And so I'll often remove my own video from the screen and then put something up near the camera to remind me to look up there. A Post-it note or a picture, something to just draw my attention to that little light up by the camera so that I don't forget and can give some eye contact to them. And then of course, with the friendship cues. And so that is our tip number 2 for today, to nail the first impression, whether it's in person or when you pop up on Zoom, is friendship cues. Just don't overdo the eyebrow bounce. Show confidence. You might even consider standing, even if it's a Zoom call. If you can get your laptop up high enough, standing is going to help you feel more confident. And then make those adjustments for eye contact as well. Now let's talk about some things to do during the interview. Now you can see, let's look at his body language for a minute. Does he look confident? Still trying to find that balance of being confident and likable. And what's he doing that is showing or not showing confidence? Okay. He's got his hands below the table. He's leaning forward, shoulders rolled forward, his head's down a little bit. You see some self-soothing going on a few moments ago when he touched his neck. So those are things that are going to show a lack of confidence. Let's contrast it to this. Okay, now he's got good posture. He's got his head high. His hands are on the table, and he can use his hands as he's talking. Comes across as much more confident, right? And we can do the same thing on a Zoom call. You may have to just adjust how far away you are from the screen, which there's another reason for that we're going to talk about in a minute too, so that they can see your posture and see your hands. But then there's the same caution to not overdo it and not be too overconfident. Now, I've hinted at the importance of getting the right distance away from the camera. There's another thing that we're starting to find from being in a virtual world for this long. You might have heard that term Zoom fatigue getting thrown around a lot. For many people, there's just something about a Zoom call that is unsettling or uncomfortable or that they don't like, and people are getting kind of tired of it. There are lots of theories as to why that is, and there's lots of contributing factors. One of the reasons that I've been hearing that I think makes sense is based off the idea that our have a difficult time telling if something on a screen is real or not. You look at how many years of evolution our brains have been developing, and technology has been around a very small portion of that. And so especially the primitive parts of our brains have a hard time telling the difference between what's real and what's fake on a screen, which is one of the reasons why we like watching scary movies. Consciously we know this isn't real, but we'll have a lot of the same physiological responses as if it were. Increased heart rate, we'll get sweaty palms, and we'll get a little fight or flight because our brains have a hard time telling the difference. One of the things in an in-person interaction that will put us into fight or flight faster than about anything else is if someone invades our personal space. Okay, if you invade someone's personal space, they're going to immediately feel uncomfortable. That makes sense in person. If we're in a virtual meeting, we might inadvertently be appearing to be in someone's personal space by being too close to the camera, right? So if I'm super close to the camera, I may not even consciously know why this is making me feel uncomfortable, but there's something about it that just doesn't feel right. And it's probably because I virtually am coming into someone else's space. So here's a quick gut check. I tried to find a stock photo of someone with a neutral expression. Gut feel, does zoomed in or zoomed out make you feel more comfortable, a little more at ease? It's usually the one that's back a little bit farther. So with our Zoom calls, let's find that optimal distance from the laptop to eliminate that as a variable. And zooming out to your torso is usually a pretty good one. You don't want to be too far away from the camera because then you also can't reach your keyboard anymore. But you also don't want to be too close to where you might inadvertently be encroaching on their virtual personal space. And so if you get that right distance from it where you're showing your torso, then you're also using your hands, which is also a great way to boost trust and to help people keep engaged and listening to what you're saying. So find a balance with that too. It can sometimes be difficult to reach the keyboard, but you do the best you can. Another consideration in a virtual world during these interviews is the angle of the camera. We don't think about this very much, but height differences affect how we're perceived. Now, don't shoot the messenger, but our brains are wired such that if somebody is higher than us, we tend to see them as more powerful, more successful, more dominant. There was another Brain Games on this where they had pictures of a tall guy and a short guy and asked people, who do you think made more money? And most people thought the tall guy made more money. And so in person, there's only so much you can do about that. In meetings, you can adjust your seat height to try to be on the same level as the person, so you're not towering over them or subservient and submissive to them. You try to be on the same level. The most common thing I see with the virtual world is the laptop will be slightly below us. And so if I'm higher than the camera, I'm higher than the person, and I'm almost looking down my nose at them, which can come across as too arrogant or too condescending. So within reason, if we can try to level that up as well and be on the same level as the person we're talking to, then that also eliminates that unintended consequence if we don't have the same height. So level up as much as possible. And again, consider standing if you can. It's not always possible, but where you can, then that can help too. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before we finish up is our backgrounds. And this is an area that I'm just now starting to delve into, and I don't think we fully understand the implications of what our backgrounds can have on how we're perceived and that balance of likability and trust. But there has been some research that I found interesting. This is, if you can look for this on YouTube. It's from a guy named Robert Cialdini. Now, he's a professor of marketing and psychology and has literally wrote the book on persuasion. And he has this relatively newer area of focus called persuasion. The idea with persuasion is that there's things in the environment that are influencing our mindsets that are going to make us more or less likely to accept a proposal. And one of the studies that he did that's relevant to this conversation is researchers had a guy asking for girls' phone numbers at a shopping center while standing in front of different kinds of shops. And most of the shops, he'd only get 13-ish% of the women willing to give him his phone number. But if he were standing in front of a flower shop, then almost double the number of phone numbers just from what he had in the background. Okay, so that's starting to show us that what we have in the background is influencing what's going on in the other person's minds and perceptions and does affect behavior. Some other research they did with this was on performance for different types of roles. In a call center where people had to call alumni from universities and ask them for donations. If they had this little piece of paper that had a script on it they'd follow, if there was a picture on that paper of a runner winning a race, that boosted performance. They got more money from the alumni by 60% just by having that background image of victory and winning. In a different kind of role though, one that was a little more cognitive, then things like nature scenes or a runner winning a race didn't boost performance. If it was more of a meticulous cognitive type of role, then an image of the thinker statue actually boosted performance. So obviously there's lots of different directions we could go with this and lots of research. I think the first takeaway is to just be aware that the background matters and to give, without overdoing it, give some thought as to what what kinds of feelings do I want to invoke with my background? What kinds of messages do I want to send with it? And to make sure that's congruent with what we want. I thought it'd be interesting to look at what Robert Cialdini, since he does all this research, what does he choose for his background? And here's one of his YouTube videos, and he has books behind him. I'm like, okay, interesting. This is Vanessa Van Edwards. She's the founder of The Science of People. And so she deliberately chose some pictures of these chemicals that our brains produce that make us happy. Things like dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin, because that's part of her branding, that she's trying to show the science of people and how to help people to be happy and successful. Here's another guy, Seth Godin. He's a marketing guru. What did he choose for his background? He chose books. Interesting. So there's probably no surprise that I chose books to put behind me as well. So just give us some thought on what you want to communicate and what kinds of perceptions you want. Obviously, you still want it to be professional. So think about, like, if it's a tech job, maybe you want to have some servers with blinking lights and wires behind you because that will convey that you're a little bit of a tech nerd. If that's the audience you're going to be talking to and that's what you want to communicate, then maybe that's the right background. Or maybe you want to have books to maybe communicate knowledge or wisdom, something like that to the person. So give it some thought without overdoing it. You don't have to spend too much time on it, but at least be aware that this does have an effect. Obviously, we wouldn't want to have a whole bunch of messy clutter as we're working from home in the background to send an unprofessional message. So that is tip number 3, power body language. And really that's applies throughout the entire process, but continuing through the interview is good positive body language. Find that optimal zoom between the laptop and yourself. And then if you can, try to level it up so you're eye level with the camera and on the same level as the person you're speaking with, and then give some thought to the backgrounds and the impacts that might have. So in summary, go to photofeeler.com, give yourself a profile upgrade, and think about these tips with first impressions and confidence and some of the adjustments that we've talked about for virtual interviews as well. Now, if you have questions after this, feel free to reach out to me on your social media of choice.
All right. Well, with that, Jeff, on behalf of myself and everyone else on the call, thank you so much for giving us such great info today and some really great key takeaways that, as I said earlier, you don't often hear discussed in job search success or in career success, but the tips that you have given us, I am confident are going to help us, 1, be better in our interviews, and then 2, with career management, as you said. So such important takeaways. And it really is about just starting to apply what you have learned. And if you realize you missed something, well, that's okay. You know what? I'll get it next time. So I'm going to start working on my background. I'm going to get some books.
I like your background. I like the quote behind you.
It says, create the things you wish existed.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, thank you. I do have my Piper bots over here with my Raspberry Pis in them. So that's my techie contribution to my background.
Excellent.
All right, everyone.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for coming. And if anybody does, Jeff, you dropped in your LinkedIn. Do you want to drop it in one more time just in case somebody joined after we dropped in LinkedIn's? So thank you so much for coming today. Again, at Computer Coach, we run a lot of job seeker webinars and career success webinars. So do follow us on our Eventbrite so that you will find out about more amazing content just like today's content. And with that, I will wish you all a wonderful, fabulous weekend. And do reach out if you have any questions. Jeff is available. You can reach out to myself, Cassandra Perez from Computer Coach. And I hope you guys have a safe and fun-filled weekend. And hopefully I'll see you Monday on Career Success Coffee Talk.
To learn more about our training programs, classes, and what sets us apart, please visit our website at www.computercoach.com.